Like one day, I just found myself knocking on the door of the fridge. To open the fridge, I just knocked on the door and then just waited for an answer. And then was like, I need help. I just need help.
This is Caregiver Storyteller, produced by CaringKind, the heart of Alzheimer's caregiving. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Storyteller, a storytelling podcast about Alzheimer's and dementia caregiving. I'm Chris Doucette, and I'll be interviewing caregivers to get their stories about Alzheimer's and dementia caregiving. Occasionally, I'll also interview the authors, advocates, researchers, healthcare professionals, and people with Alzheimer's and dementia to hear their stories too. So, are you ready? Here we go.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Lisa Mosconi. I am an associate professor of neuroscience and neurology at Weill Cornell Medical Center, where I serve as the associate director of the Alzheimer's Prevention Clinic in the Department of Neurology. So I was born and raised in Florence, in Italy, but I live in New York City.
And you love it.
So, New York or Florence? I love Florence. Yeah. I like New York. It's very different from Italy. I think the city has so much to offer and is so convenient and everything is so easy to obtain, and there's so many more opportunities in New York and in the States as compared to Italy. But I do think that Italians embrace quality of life a little bit more than people do here. Like my friends don't have the kind of stresses that we have.
I believe that.
Right? And food is better, and even healthcare is actually better on some levels.
Yeah. And what brought you to New York? Why come here?
Why here? So I was doing my PhD in Florence. I have a dual PhD in neuroscience and nuclear medicine. And,
wow.
Right.
Say, what is nuclear medicine?
So nuclear medicine is a branch of radiology. Very specifically, so radiology does a lot of things, but mostly is focused on structure and lesions in some ways. Nuclear medicine does that, but on top of that, we use tracers to go inside your body and allow you to see certain things. Like I'm sure everybody is familiar with images or pictures of the brain where some parts are red, blue, yellow.
Right.
That's nuclear medicine.
I see.
Yeah, we measure like function, activity, or biochemistry, really. And I specialize in brains, obviously, but you can do heart, you can do anything in the brain that has an activity.
Right. Why did you choose this direction for your life for either PhD?
Yeah, it's a good question.
What was it that brought you to that
field? I wanted to do this since I was little, I think. So my parents, both of them, are nuclear physicists.
Okay.
I know. So very weird childhood. And my mom in particular, she was teaching nuclear physics to her students who then transitioned to medicine. And they worked in nuclear medicine because you need a lot of physicists just to, for all the modeling, the kinetics, even just running the machine, interpolations. It's very complex. And so they would literally babysit me. And so I grew up thinking that was the coolest thing ever. And then as soon as I finished, actually after 3 years at the university, we have 5 years university degrees. You don't break it up into bachelor and master's. It's just 5 years all at once. And so after 3 years, I started volunteering there. So I really was fascinated with the brain, and so they took me in and they started training me to understand a little better how the brain works and how to use all these sophisticated techniques to really measure brain activity and the correlation between what the brain does and what happens behaviorally, right?
Wow.
The things you say, how well you walk.
Interesting.
Your memory works.
When you think back to your earlier days, when you were new to the field, when you were doing your PhD, and obviously you were, neck deep in all of this research and learning, was there one thing that kind of stood out to you when you learned something about the brain that fascinated you? Think back to a time when you learned something about the brain and you were gobsmacked. You're like, I can't believe the brain works like that.
Yes,
Anything?
think. Well, back then, I think I had 2 revelations in my professional career. The first one was the incredible degree of synchronicity in the organization that's inside the brain, like how every single thing that happens in the brain is just so perfectly regulated. It's really insane. Like everything has a reason. If you do A, then you have B, C, and D, and everything is just so synchronized and just so perfect that you really get lost in the biochemistry of the brain, and it's just a source of wonder. Just even how do we see shapes? Right. We take it for granted, but in reality, the mechanisms are incredible. Like you have neurons that literally, this pack of neurons only fire if you have a vertical line in front of you, and these other neurons fire if the line is horizontal. And if they fire together, then you see an L shape. It's just, okay, well, it makes sense, but it's just so incredible that that's the way it works. And then years later, when I was already in New York, the other revelation I had is that I had everything wrong. Basically, I started working in this field. I always worked in Alzheimer's prevention, all the time from the very beginning. So it was called early detection when I started, and now people are more comfortable talking about prevention. And when I started, because of my background, I have a really strong biology background, and that speaks to genetics. So my first interest was really what kind of things in your DNA make you get Alzheimer's or not.
Before you continue, of all the things that can happen to the brain, why did you steer towards Alzheimer's?
It was not my choice at first. At first, it was not. So I was training. So before starting my PhD, I did a 1-year mandatory training in neurology and psychiatry. And I just got folded into a project about early detection of Alzheimer's. They got a big grant from the European Union, and they needed somebody to really supervise all the stats, all the analyses, and I was thrilled.
Good. So circumstance and opportunity. Yeah.
But exactly at the same time that I was actually learning more about Alzheimer's, my grandmother started showing symptoms of dementia. And at first it was very subtle. We were just like, oh, she's just cranky. But I think within a year, it got serious, very serious. And that was very scary for all of us. Just so you guys know, in Italy, we don't have the structures that you have here. There are no senior homes.
Really?
No. There are no senior homes.
So it's all family caregiving?
All family caregiving.
Interesting.
I think there are some now, maybe Milan, like in very more industrialized cities where people just can't afford to have a big home. Or I mean, not that we had a huge home, but usually your grandparents or your parents have their own place. Right. And you usually live nearby. Yeah. Because in Italy, very few people move. You're born in one city and you just grow up in that city. Yeah. And so, you are by default the caregiver.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And then my grandma's sister got Alzheimer's or some form of dementia, and then her younger sister got it too. And like within 3 years of each other. Wow. 3 to 5 years, I would say. It was just like, oh my God.
That sounds overwhelming for the family.
It was incredible. It was absurd.
And
all
who was the main caregiver for your grandmother and her sisters?
So for my grandma was my mom and my dad, of course, but it was really mostly my grandmother. And her sisters actually lived in a different city, so their own daughters.
Okay.
Yes.
And how was
always the girls, always.
Well, that's true in America too, right?
Yeah, like it's much more so.
It's much more the women who end up taking on the caregiving role. Yes. And what was the impact on your mom as she
suffered?
She suffered.
She suffered enormously. Every patient has a different experience as they go through Alzheimer's or dementia, and the symptoms, we tend to cluster them into, memory loss, attention, language, but the reality is so much more complex. And for my grandma, she got really aggressive, incredibly aggressive, and she was so just confused, and she basically locked herself in the house. And towards like a few years later, she just would not want to see anyone but my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what happens to many Alzheimer's patients, that they're up at night. They sleep all day and then they're wide awake at night screaming. And so my mom got no sleep. And she had to work during the day, obviously, right? So at some point they got help, like a lady who moved in with my grandma. Mm-hmm. And so she was taking the day. You know, she was there during the day. She would clean my grandma, give her food, and that was very helpful. Although, of course, it's very expensive to be able to do that. But then at night she went to sleep. And then my mom would start the night shift, basically. So she was a complete wreck. And I was already living here, so I couldn't really even help that much. Although, again, my grandma just wanted my mom to know.
And what was your grandmother like before the symptoms started showing?
Oh, it's a sad story. She was tough. She was really tough. She grew up during World War I, right, in Italy. And then she had my mom and my uncle during World War II. And my grandfather was a general in the Italian army. So as soon as Italy decided to break the alliance with the Nazis, my grandfather immediately got arrested and shipped to a concentration camp in Austria. So my grandma was alone in Italy, where there was no food whatsoever. Sometimes they had no food for like weeks.
Right.
I won't tell you what they had to eat.
Right.
And she was raising these two very young kids. And then when the war was over, my grandfather fortunately made it back from concentration camp, but in a state,
right,
of course. And so then she had to go to work. And she was actually one of the very first women in Italy to get a university degree in business. There weren't that many women.
After all of that,
before,
she went and got a degree.
Before.
Okay,
She had a degree from before.
Oh, my goodness.
But in Italy, women just didn't go to university,
Right.
back then. But she went. You know, she was a very strong
very
woman.
driven.
And then, yes, incredibly, very smart, very just incredible strength of will. And then she went to teach when my grandpa just couldn't work at that point. And so really nothing broke her spirit until dementia arrived. And then she just completely broke down. And it was just so shocking for us because she was such a strong presence in her family.
Right.
You know, even our extended family.
Right.
She was like the boss, really. She was literally the boss. And she was tough. She was very tough.
Yeah. And that's so hard,
Yes,
especially if someone's identity is based on strength.
Yes.
Then the opposite occurs, and it becomes an identity crisis for the whole family, I'm sure.
Yeah. We were just like, what is going on? Yeah, we had no idea what to do. Even just how to handle her.
Right.
You know, because she's not like, she just got even more in control. In some way, trying to maintain control. So it was very hard just to say to her, we're going to get help for you. That was like, it took years before she agreed to have anybody in the house.
Wow. And you're a super educated, competent family, right?
Very.
Like you have resources that some people don't have.
100%,
and it's still, it still sounds like a very painful ordeal.
Oh my God, yes, of course. I think education has nothing to do with, right? You're just completely unprepared. It doesn't, I mean, I studied.
Right.
I prepared in some ways to deal with Alzheimer's, and I was just baffled. It was like, why is this happening?
And how did that influence your ongoing education?
Oh, it did. It did a lot. So I started looking into prevention even more, and I started really questioning my education because we didn't have a family history of Alzheimer's. Nobody else had it in my family. But
wow.
no,
and all
nothing.
Of a sudden, boom, 3.
Nothing. 3.
Yeah.
All 3 of them, all women. Also, right? Because they also had a brother who never had issues. It was 4 of them, and only the girls, only the women got Alzheimer's. And so what I was saying before is that I started working in this field thinking that genetics and your DNA was really key. And after many years of just trying to find genetic markers that really applied to the Alzheimer's population, I was like, this is just not working. No, there's something else that is just as important and I'm not looking into. And that's when I started looking into lifestyle, and especially into nutrition and diet, because there was work showing how a poor diet I didn't say predisposed, but how if you have a poor diet, somehow that associates with an increased risk of dementia as you get older. And there were studies wonderful studies, where they had a lot of people, like thousands of people now, and they looked at their diets, and then they would follow these people for years to decades. And then they were able to correlate the diet pattern the first time the patients walked in the door with the future risk of Alzheimer's. And that was interesting to me because they were all about the Mediterranean diet and how a Mediterranean diet, a Mediterranean style diet can be protective against dementia. And because I do brain imaging all the time, I thought, well, it would be very interesting to see what happens in the brain. Like, I don't want to have to wait 10 years to be able to say, oh yeah, the way you ate 10 years before is now giving you these problems. I want to be able to have the patient walk in the door, we go to the machine, we take scans of the brain, we talk about diet, exercise, sleep, stress, intellectual stimulation, and I want to see what happens in your brain that could be related to that. So I started doing that. I started my own lab. I was a professor by then, and I started my own lab. I used to work at New York University School of Medicine at NYU, and it was the nutrition and brain fitness lab. And it was interesting to me.
You say that with a smile. Why?
I didn't choose the name. It was the chairman of my department who suggested nutrition and brain fitness lab. It sounds a little new agey to me, but it's actually what we were doing. And the other thing is that I realized I knew nothing about nutrition or diet. Like, we don't study that in school, even in Italy. We don't study it in school. There was not even an elective. Nothing. And we're Italian. I mean, we understand the food is medicine. We care about the quality of our foods. We're obsessive about our food.
Yeah, you are.
Very much. Yes, very, very much. And so I went back to school. There was not enough education for me. I went back to school, and now I'm also a nutritionist. I'm a certified, board certified nutritionist, and it's called holistic
Is
nutrition.
that in addition to the 2 PhDs? Wow.
I know, and the 5 years university degree. I basically have 24 years of education.
You have a lot more than I do. What did you learn from the nutrition education that you got? How did it change your perspective on the previous education that you had with regard to brain health?
So I think if you start the way I started, that you really study biochemistry and biology, then when you study nutrition, it sounds a little bit like, I could use some more details. Right. But what was really important to me was, number one, to understand how people think about nutrition and all the different dietary theories that are available, and why is it that people go on fad diets all the time? It isn't just the psychology of food. I had no insight. And what was really important to me was to rethink neurochemistry, brain chemistry, as actual nutrition. That was my second revelation that I was going to say. I studied a lot of neurochemistry, and it's all about potassium, sodium, magnesium, protein, fat, omega-3 fatty acids, and choline, that is a B vitamin. But I never thought that's actually food. For me, it was just chemistry.
Right.
But where are they coming from? Where are these molecules coming from? They're not just magically appearing inside your brain. They're actually coming from the foods you eat. So it makes a lot of sense that your diet will influence your brain health, especially, everybody says, but how about exercise? How about intellectual stimulation? They would say yes, with the difference that we eat 5 times a day, every single day,
Right.
from the moment we're born.
Right.
We exercise twice a week, right? Some
At
people
most.
more,
Yeah.
but some people less. And
Yeah.
a lot of people go through a period of time where they're not exercising, or you're not stimulating your brain intellectually. A lot of people go through periods of time where they just can't sleep, but
Right.
mostly you sleep.
Right.
But food is really something that goes inside your body every single day from the moment you're born,
Right.
many times a day. And so it's got more of a chance to make an impact. And so that's why I decided to write this book, Brain Food, to really share the research and take the research out of the lab and into people's lives, because like all my patients tell me that people are confused about brain nutrition. It's a scientist's approach to brain nutrition, so it's really based on research. And anybody can say this is backed by science, and then you can show that one little paper published in some obscure journal that
Right.
shows an effect, but in reality that's not the way science works.
Right.
You need to have clinical trials, you need to have a lot of papers showing exactly the same thing in order to
Right.
call that reality.
Right.
Right, so there's
Right.
a different approach, I think, that scientists take when they really review what's available out there. And also it's my research. We have done so much research looking at the effects of diet and nutrition in the brain, and we can show the effects using brain scans. And in a way, the timing was right in some ways, because society has gone from veganism and a lot of plants and grains and fruit and very little animal foods, to ketogenic diets, where pretty much nobody touches grains because they're terrified of gluten, and at the same time they're loading up on very high fat foods.
Yeah.
And that's incredibly dangerous for the brain. Like there's plenty of literature showing that too much fat is just not good for your brain. And sure, the quality and the source of the fat makes a difference, but in general, it's just not the right way to support your brain. And the reason that I share this in the book is that the nutritional needs of the brain and the body are not the same.
Interesting. So
Right.
talk more about that, because that
Yeah.
sounds
That was
strange
interesting
to me, quite frankly.
Right. Well, it sounds
Your
strange
brain is
for
part
sure.
of your body, so why wouldn't it be the same?
That's an excellent question. And because your brain is more important. Well, when I say more important, it's more precious in some ways. It's more delicate. Delicate is a good way. So the brain is in charge of all the rest of you. And so it really needs to be protected from anything that can come from the outside that could potentially be harmful. Hormone, toxins, pathogens, bacteria, anything that comes from the outside needs to be basically screened. The same way that I went through reception downstairs and I had to show an ID
Yes.
to be allowed up here. That's the same thing that happens in the brain. So the brain has a barrier that separates the brain from the rest of the body. It's called the blood-brain barrier. And what's interesting about it is that it comes with a lot of little gates, and the brain opens the gates when the brain itself is hungry. So you have gates for sugar, you have gates for this particular kind of fat, you have gates for this vitamin, or you have gates for this mineral.
I give my brain way too much sugar.
You
I
do?
can tell you, I do.
Well,
I'm a
let me
chocolate
tell
freak,
you.
so-
Let me tell you. It's not a sponge. That's the other thing. So it's the brain that regulates entry of food inside the brain. You can eat all the sugar you want, but your brain is not going to get any of it unless it needs it. Which is not to say you should eat too much sugar.
Heard it
That's
here,
not what
folks. You can have as much sugar as you want.
No. But, too much sugar, especially refined sugar, creates a lot of other problems in the body, like inflammation. It creates insulin resistance, obesity, too much bad fat, and hormonal imbalances. For women especially, as soon as you're like premenopausal, which means anywhere between 35 and 51, sugar has got to be drastically reduced, because it really impacts your hormones in a bad way.
Yeah.
The same for caffeine, for alcohol, all the good stuff.
Yeah.
There should be treats once in a while, but not the norm.
Right.
And in the States, we have a tendency to overdo it with refined and processed foods
Yes.
that are really not healthy for you. But going back to the brain decides what to eat. And the brain is very selective. So there are foods and nutrients that can be helpful to the rest of your body, especially fat, because the rest of your body can burn it for energy, but the brain cannot. So there is fat inside the brain, but the brain cannot burn it to make energy. The only reason to have fat inside your brain is for structural purposes. It's needed like to shield your neurons, to give plasticity to membranes, to help maintain your neurons' fluids, and it really helps also for immune system concerns, like omega-3 fatty acids are anti-inflammatory, omega-6 fatty acids are pro-inflammatory, so you want to have a good balance. Basically what happens is that of all the fat that we can get from the diet, these fats that I just mentioned are the only ones that can get inside your brain. They're called polyunsaturated fatty acids, and they're like omega-3 and omega-6. There's also omega-9, omega-7 that we just don't get to talk about because the media somehow didn't make them popular.
Okay.
I know.
Yeah, because I've heard of the first ones, but not the other ones.
Right, no,
Yeah.
there's plenty of fats that just never get mentioned. Phospholipids, sphingolipids, those are actually the main fats inside the brain that we just never talk about.
Right.
But cholesterol can't get inside your brain ever.
Ever.
Never. So the brain makes all his own cholesterol when we're born. And then that's it. Just the cholesterol can never come inside the brain from the outside, and the cholesterol in the brain just stays right there.
It stays there.
It leaks just a little tiny little bit, but cholesterol is just made by the brain, in the brain, for the brain. There's no exchange.
Okay.
Saturated fat, like all these diets are saying we should eat a lot of saturated fat because it's good for the brain. No, it's not. It's really not.
So what's an example of a saturated fat? Like avocado fat?
Yes, although avocado is rich in monounsaturated fatty acids that are good for the heart. But I would say more like, when you have ham, and there's the white ribbon fat that you get in meat, for instance, is an example of saturated fat. Dairy. When you eat cream, that's a lot of saturated fat.
And that's good for, and the brain that's not good for the brain.
It's not, the brain just doesn't use it. That's the thing. So the brain makes saturated fat inside the brain when we're kids and when we're actually, as soon as we're born. So when we're infants, it makes the most. And also takes some up from the diet, but only when you're a child. And by the time you reach adolescence, that's it. Pretty much the rate of uptake from blood is minimal. And I can tell you because we do that with brain scans. Like we can measure how much fat is literally getting inside the brain. And the uptake for saturated fat is close to zero. The only kind of saturated fat that can get inside the brain is kind of short. It's called like medium chain triglycerides. But even then, uptake is very small as compared to the omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids, which means the brain just doesn't need as much.
Okay.
It'll just take up a little bit, and everything else will stay and just deposit it on their waist, basically, or whatever.
So how do we know what our brain needs, right? So if the brain is hungry for something, how do we know that? Like, and how we don't? Well,
one way to find out is if you feel like very low energy, if you feel like brain fog, or if you're not focused, if you have a hard time concentrating, that's a sign that your brain is either tired, or that you need to stretch, or that you need a massage, or number one, you need more water. Too many people are mildly dehydrated and they don't realize that. But the brain is the one organ in the body that suffers the most when we don't drink enough water. And that's another difference between the brain and the rest of the organs, that the brain is 80% water as compared to much less in the other organs. And every single chemical reaction that takes place in the brain needs water to occur. And that's everything from energy production to making the neurotransmitters, like the chemicals that the brain needs to communicate, right? The neurons, brain cells, need to communicate information.
Right.
That's all based on water. And so even just a 2 to 4% water loss, which is nothing. It's just basically a sunny day. If you don't drink enough water, can cause neurological symptoms like confusion, brain fog, dizziness, forgetfulness, even.
Wow,
so we need
really
to drink more.
The first thing about brain health is really
water.
Hydration.
Yes.
More than nutrition.
I would say hydration would be my number one, yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yes. And also there are, not my work, but other studies show that if you're chronically dehydrated, your brain loses volume and you'll see brain shrinkage. So your brain is shrinking when you're not drinking enough.
Wow.
And you don't want your brain to shrink.
No.
No.
Mine is small enough already. I don't need any more. So in your book, do you talk about what foods you recommend people eat on a regular basis?
Sure.
And what, what kind of foods are they?
So I always start with fish. And everybody is like, oh, I don't like fish. And I would say, I love fish.
I love fish.
Right?
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I know good fish is an incredible brain food because the nutritional composition of fish is pretty much an excellent mirror to the chemical composition of your brain. So
really?
all the yes, there's everything good. We have fishy brain. Yeah, that's funny. Yes, we have fishy brains, but it's true. So the omega-3 density, especially of DHA. So omega-3s, omega-6 fatty acids, they come in different forms. And there's one form that the brain needs every single day. It's called DHA, omega-3 DHA. And it's only in fish.
It's only in fish?
Yeah. Yeah, it's the only source of DHA. So for vegetarians or vegans who take the vegan form of omega-3 supplements, that's a different form of omega-3. It's called ALA, and it can be converted to DHA. But the problem is that 75% is lost in the conversion. So if that's the kind of supplements that people are taking, it's important to know you need to take 3 times as much.
Interesting.
Basically, because you're losing 75% of that. So that was fish. Fish is my number one. Number 2 is greens. And I think it sounds obvious in some ways, but so many people don't eat enough fresh greens. And when they do, it's always the same kind.
Yeah.
Right? But the brain really needs diversity. Yeah. So it's very important to have a little bit of everything that is green because different veggies contain different combinations of nutrients.
So fish and a variety of greens, whether it's kale or broccoli or
spinach.
Green beans and
Spinach is a good one. All the mixed greens. I would go seasonal to really have the most phytonutrients, which are nutrients from plants that are the antioxidant part of the plant or the anti-aging part of the plant. So they have to be fresh and they have to be colorful.
Yeah.
No iceberg lettuce.
No.
I
don't like those anyway. That's fine.
Yeah, but a lot of people, it's pretty much the only kind of salad that they eat is iceberg lettuce, which doesn't have any good nutrients in there.
What about frozen greens? Because I do that a lot.
It's better than nothing, for sure. And if you buy frozen organic, it's actually a good way to save some money on the organic and have good veggies. But, when you freeze them, you do lose a bunch of nutrients. And then the only way to cook, you have to cook them.
Right.
And then you further downgrade the nutrients. So I would say do that for sure, but also have a salad.
Right.
Maybe for lunch, alternate.
So fish and mixed greens.
And berries. Berries are great for the brain. Yes, and everybody thinks
what do they have?
They're packed with antioxidants. You know how they're so colorful? So the color comes from pigments that are also phytonutrients, nutrients from plants. And everyone has a special and particular antioxidant action. So what happens in the brain, which is the reason that the brain ages more than the other organs and needs more protection, is that it's very prone to oxidative stress, which is when free radicals form. The same way when you smoke and you have free radicals in your lungs. The same thing happens in your brain, just as a natural process as we get older, much more so than anywhere else in your body. And so the brain really needs antioxidants to balance that out. So the brain produces an oxidation just because of the way the brain is. It has a lot of fat, and fat oxidizes easily. And so we need to give the brain the antioxidants that it needs to kind of quench the inflammation and the oxidation.
For someone like me who's hurt my brain my entire life, can you repair any damage that's been done to the brain?
You can improve.
It can improve.
For sure, yes. I mean, damage is a difficult word to deal with, right? Like, it comes in so many different forms and in so many different levels. You know, there's a very mild damage, and then there's the damage that Alzheimer's can do to your brain. So depending on what the status of your brain is,
I see.
you need to do more or less. You need to take action right away, or you can just tweak your diet. But for some people, it's really a complete revamp. It's like a whole lifestyle modification. And I think this is so important for caregivers because, like we were saying before, there's evidence that caregivers might be at higher risk for Alzheimer's as compared to non-caregivers. And that's obviously not because of your genes. It's because of your lifestyle.
Right,
that
because
you were
some
sharing with the
caregivers
patient.
are not related to the person they're caring for. So,
there could be the spouses.
Right.
Right. In that case, it's really not genetic. For the children, yes, it's a different story for sure. It can be a combination of both. So it's really, but for everybody, I think it's really important to focus on your lifestyle and just be as healthy as you can possibly be, because there are no side effects to that. And if you can, right?
There are no downsides to taking care of yourself. And that's why at CaringKind, one of the main messages we give people is self-care. Because if you're not taking care of yourself, you're eventually going to run yourself ragged, and you won't be able to care for the person that you're caring for.
Yeah, then you need care.
Right. And then you need care. And then it just becomes a falling dominoes, right?
Yes. And can I add something especially for women? This is so important because we know, and this is a huge part of my research, I specialize in women's health and Alzheimer's risk. We know that of every 3 Alzheimer's patients, 2 are women everywhere in the world. And the majority of caregivers are women everywhere in the world. So as women, we are at risk for Alzheimer's just by virtue of the fact that we are women, which is really upsetting in so many ways. But we have done so much research trying to understand why women have more risk of Alzheimer's than men, and why women outnumber men 2 to 1 in the general population, like globally. And it looks like hormones have really a big role in that. We have shown by doing brain imaging that if you take men and women of age 40 to 60 and you compare them, women's brains just age faster than men who are exactly the same age. And that really depends not just on your chronological age, but on your hormonal age. So as we start going through menopause and perimenopause, even before then, your progesterone goes down, then eventually your estrogen goes down, and your brain pretty much shuts down accordingly. And that's when women start to show accumulation of Alzheimer's plaques in their brains, whereas men are totally fine. Which is, of course, right? Of course they're fine. But I think hormonal imbalance, eventually everybody gets through menopause, because you have to do that. But the way different women experience that can be very different. There are women who have no problems and women who have a lot of neurological symptoms, right? Like hot flashes, night sweats, insomnia. So many people, just so many women suffer from insomnia, stress, too much stress, anxiety, depression, memory loss, confusion, forgetfulness. This happens in midlife,
right?
Regardless of whether or not you have a family history of Alzheimer's. It just happens because you're a woman, because your hormones are changing, and probably because your lifestyle is not helpful.
Well, that was my question, is that, the change in hormones is happening just because it's a biological fact of life.
Yeah, but we make it so much worse.
But then you add another layer to it where your hormones affected by your actual lifestyle. So if you smoke and drink and stay out late, or you're stressed by, maybe you're a caregiver, maybe you're not, but all of these things impact hormones. And what you're saying is that hormones actually affect the brain and can predispose a person to illness.
Yes, it can accelerate aging in the brain, and aging is a risk factor for Alzheimer's, for sure. And I think what a lot of women maybe they just don't realize that having hot flashes and insomnia is not your ovaries, it's actually your brain that's suffering. And if your brain is giving you signs of unease, we need to address them. And especially hormones have a really strong lifestyle, has a really strong influence on hormones, especially stress. So what I wanted to say is that caregivers usually are stressed out, as they should.
Yeah.
But the stress is not just stress. The stress is actually impacting your hormonal levels. And that in turn really impacts your brain as a woman.
So it's not just the emotional experience of caregiving, it's also taking a physical toll.
Oh, yes, for sure. For sure, yes. It just makes everything worse, but especially your hormones. And so stress is number one because the stress hormone is called cortisol. And the higher the cortisol is, the lower your progesterone is. They're like in balance. So if you have high cortisol, your progesterone goes down and your estrogens go down. But then you lower your cortisol and the other hormones are like, oh, finally. And you can take a breather and just go back up. So I think it's really important to find stress reduction techniques. I think it's unreasonable to say, oh, just stress out less.
Right.
What kind of advice is that? Nobody likes to be stressed out.
That's stressful to have someone. Imagine you're upset and someone says, calm down.
Calm down. You
get
calm down.
more upset.
Yes, for sure. But it's actually very important to find ways to lower stress.
Right.
Because especially for women under a lot of stress and in midlife, which is usually when you end up being a caregiver.
Right. But how do you do that? Honestly, in a real life scenario, if you are, 45 to 50-year-old woman taking care of a person with Alzheimer's, and especially if they're a family member, then how, and you have to work as your mother worked.
Yes.
How do you work and take care of someone and then find the time to actually take care of yourself and eat right and go to the farmer's market and buy fresh green? I mean, that seems like don't
go to the farmer's market. Buy food online. That's for sure. I think it's very personal.
Yeah.
And different strategies work for different people. Like, so when my daughter was born, I'm not a caregiver at this point, but I do have a toddler. And after my daughter was born, I was working full time and my husband was in Boston. So I was broadly a single mom most of the week with a very demanding job. I was writing the book in my second language, and I had an infant who just did not sleep at night.
Right.
I was beyond stressed out. I was beyond, help. I was at the help level.
Right.
And so I found help. I found that, personally, I respond to homeopathy. I know for me it makes no sense that it would work, but it actually does. For some people, not for everybody, but for some people it works. And so I took homeopathic remedies to just reduce cortisol levels. I tested myself for cortisol and it was high.
The benefit of being a scientist.
Yes, but I don't think you really need to test it. I mean, if you're stressed, you're stressed. And if you're stressed, your cortisol is high. It doesn't take a doctor to tell you, that.
Yeah.
Although, if you want to test it, it's actually better. And your doctor can guide you through the process, which is so much better than self-medication. And so those remedies really help me sleep at night. And if you can get a good night's sleep, your day is so much easier in so many ways. So many women have a hard time falling back asleep, right? Once you wake up in the middle of the night, it's so hard for so many of us, because for me it's impossible, to just go back to sleep.
Right.
And that helped me. There are very natural remedies that help. Like, I'm going to go totally new age on this, but dark cherry extract.
Okay.
It's a juice that you mix with water. And if you drink it, somehow it promotes relaxation and it helps you sleep at night. Melatonin, for some people, helps. If hormonal imbalances is the problem, then rhodiola is a good supplement. There's another one. Chestberry extract is another good supplement. And omega-3s are really essential. I would say if there's one thing you can do to really help your brain throughout a period of stress, a B vitamin complex, a B complex vitamin supplement. And with all the different kinds, like B5 is really important, B6, B12, and folate.
A lot of Bs. So a lot of Bs and folic acid.
Which is also a B.
Oh, it's a B
It's a
too.
B9.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
So like a B complex vitamin and omega-3 supplements, DHA. Or the vegan one.
So if you're stressed, that's like a one easy thing to do is to take
I think
the
it's a
B
good
complex.
step.
Yeah.
I think it's a very... I'm not really too much in favor of supplements, but I realized when I was taking care of my baby, basically, I was at the end of my wits. Like one day, I just found myself knocking on the door of the fridge. To open the fridge, I just knocked on the door and then just waited for an answer. And then was like, I need help. I just need help. And I find that a lot of people who are taking care of somebody else have similar problems, like sleep deprivation, stress, anxiety, sadness. I wasn't sad, obviously, but, those are really good supplements. And just taking a pill for a short amount of time when you can't really give yourself the time that you need to really relax or... Yeah, of course. Like if you don't have an hour to cook whole grains, you just don't have it.
Right.
So that's a supplement. It's something that you do on top of eating healthily and trying to remove other stressors like caffeine. Hate to say that, but that's really bad in some ways.
Oh, no.
Too much. Too
Yes.
much. It disrupts your sleep. For many people, it's dehydrating.
Yeah.
Very often, the quality of the coffee is not good. It increases acidity in your body. And so your pH goes off balance, and that creates inflammation. It creates, your back hurts. And I would say start with the supplements. Take some help. Just even valerian root is a plant.
What's it called?
Valerian.
Valerian?
Valerian root. You can take pills, and it really helps sleep at night. Whereas, a lot of people take antidepressants or sleeping pills that actually don't give you restful sleep.
Right.
Don't solve the problems. You just become dependent on the pill to be able to sleep. And they give so many side effects, especially, again, in women, of course.
We've got to wrap up soon, but I want to ask a couple questions. The first one is, how do people discern the reliable information out there in the universe with regard to food as medicine and what's kind of bunky? How does a person navigate what's real and what's not?
It's a fantastic question. I think, so first of all, who says that? There are so many people without credentials at all who somehow become nutrition experts, and they're best-selling authors without really understanding the biology or even just, the chemistry of what goes on, and without any experience because they have never seen a patient in their lives. And yet their books do so well. The other thing is social media. So much information is just shared through social media, and that's great in so many ways, but it also means that the information travels much faster than anybody's ability to actually check it, right? And that's why we get all these swings from, okay, now everybody's vegan and now everybody's eating fat and nobody's touching grains, and these are trends.
Right.
And science is not fashion. And health is not fashion. I think as a scientist and as a nutritionist, my understanding of human physiology is that we strive as organisms, we need balance. The ultimate goal of any living organism is to reach homeostasis, which is basically a state of balance inside the body where everything just works well and in harmony. And I think as human beings, our mission is to support whatever balance the body and the brain are optimized for, instead of trying to disrupt that. So if something is very extreme, most likely it's going to change in 3 months. Like it's the kind of diet you will not find next year.
Right. Not sustainable.
Not sustainable. I would say go for reasonable evidence. There had to be clinical trials demonstrating causation and also looking for side effects and lack of side effects.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be standardization of a diet. There has to be very clear guidelines as to what to eat, how much, how often, and a clear understanding of what happens to you if you stay on the diet too long.
Mm-hmm.
For example, like what are the short-term side effects or the long-term side effects? If that is unknown, I would take it with caution.
Right.
You can really mess up your metabolism. Like my major concern with these extreme diets is that they have an effect on your body. And the first effect they have is that they change your metabolism. But your metabolism doesn't necessarily have to be changed unless there's a medical condition that you need to address. And in that case, talk to your doctor. Find a doctor that understands the importance of nutrition for health. And there are many at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Even just bouncing back and forth. And what is really important to also understand is that medications play a big role in your response to foods. Mm-hmm. There are some foods you should not eat if you have a medical condition. There are some foods you should not eat if you're taking some medications. There are some foods that you have to eat if you're taking some medication. There are some diets you can't do if you have like hypothyroidism. Why would anybody with hypothyroidism go on a high-fat diet? Maybe for some people it works, but for many other people it could be really shocking.
Right.
The other thing is that you don't want to keep changing diets. You don't want to go from one extreme to the other because that's the best way to, number one, induce allergies and intolerances in your body that you didn't have before. But you create them by eliminating entire food groups for periods of time. That's how your immune system starts reacting to foods.
Now that leads me to a question, though, because there is no official cure for Alzheimer's and dementia, then people are desperate for one. And then that's why people are so easily convinced that maybe if I change my diet or I can change my mother's diet and that will cure the dementia, because there are podcasts out there and there are blogs and websites that say you can cure Alzheimer's with nutraceuticals and this diet and reverse Alzheimer's, and they make these claims and people want to believe it, and so they do. And you've said that nutrition can help, but there's a lot of junk science out there too, making claims that they shouldn't be making.
I completely agree. I find it very bizarre, and I think the books should be peer-reviewed. And I never thought about it until I started looking into the kind of books that my patients read. And there are claims being made, even by people with credentials, that are just not supported by the literature, by the science, or by the research. And they get to publish it anyway. I find it very bizarre. As a scientist, I can't publish anything unless 3-4 people in my field give green light.
Right.
And it's not fun as a process. There are reviews that are very harsh. They're very demanding. They really grill you. And that's fantastic. It's hard for us, but I'm a reviewer for a lot of papers. It should be.
Right.
That's the only way to protect people from junk science, right? Or pseudoscience.
Right.
But then this mechanism that works for scientists and within academia just doesn't even exist outside of science and academia. You can say whatever you want. And sometimes people with the louder voices are those that are being heard the most. That doesn't mean that they know what they're talking about. It just means that they have a lot of time to spend on Twitter.
Yeah. That you just captured our politics in our country perfectly. We have to wrap up, but if you were to meet a caregiver for someone with Alzheimer's and dementia, what would be the one thing you would tell them?
I think that the first part is that you are right to be stressed, and that we as healthcare professionals understand and want to help. Number 2, don't isolate yourself. I've seen my mom just had no time to just even ask for help, or she didn't know how to ask for help. It's just so hard to know what we need most and how to get what we need, right? But it's really, I think it's really key to have a support group to share, especially for women. It's been shown many times that women need to share their burden, even just by talking about it, much more so than men do. They just drinking a glass of whiskey doesn't work for women. We need our support group. Take the supplements that I mentioned. They have no side effects, although, within the right doses. Just follow the dosage on the bottle. Don't go crazy with that because everything has side effects, even the good things. Take supplements that can help you. Drink a lot of water. Find something that helps you sleep at night. You need to sleep. You really do. It's essential for hormones. It's essential for your brain. Find a way to get enough sleep. I'm not saying you need to sleep 10 hours, but try to get sound sleep as much and as often as you can. Try to exercise as much as you can, even if it's just walking. Or one thing, if I can share this,
Sure.
One thing I did when my daughter was little and I had no time to go to the gym. I just had no time. So I planked. I don't know if you plank. You put yourself in a plank.
Oh, the plank position.
Yes,
Yeah.
and hold for as long as you can. And when you start the first time, if you do 2 minutes, you're lucky.
Right.
And you're burning.
It's hard.
It's so hard. I was able to get up to between 8 and 9 minutes.
Good for you.
It's only 8-9 minutes, and it's really the equivalent of running for 30. You're sweating by the time you're there. It's incredible.
Yeah.
If that helps, that's great. If there's yoga that could help, or anything that is short in time, but that you can do consistently without having to go anywhere special. If you do it on your floor, if you do it at the office, it's 10 minutes.
Right.
Right? For some people, meditation works. I go crazy when I have to meditate. But I'd rather go for a run. But that, again, is really personal. So if you're into running, run 10 minutes.
Right.
It doesn't have to take, but just give your body, find your way to help your body distress. And eat healthily as much as you can. Buy food online. Order from, Fresh Direct, Amazon Fresh.
Right.
Buy healthy foods, like greens, veggies. Maybe try green smoothies or green juice. I'm drinking one right now. Lemon juice is fantastic against stress, and it's a very strong antioxidant.
And to learn more, we can read your book, Brain Food, The Surprising Science of Eating for Cognitive Power. Dr. Lisa Mosconi, thank you so much for coming in and sharing your story and your science.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to share your story, go to caringkindnyc.org/podcast. Maybe we'll use your story on the show. We'd love to hear from you. Please subscribe to this podcast and leave some glowing feedback. We love positive reinforcement. I'm Chris Doucette, and you're listening to Caregiver Storyteller, produced by CaringKind, the heart of Alzheimer's caregiving.